I've always been a person with a deep attachment to music. So I came across the book, David Bowie and the Search for Life, Death, and God, and I knew that I must read it. The things that music makes us feel, the chords it strikes, the way it gets under your skin, the way you like hear a song and it brings back a memory, a time, a place, like something that you connect to, and like the whole creativity of it all, and like just the way like the opening chords of a song, like you hear it and it can make you smile or it can make you sad or just so many things, like the emotional connection that we have and vibe with the different music that we like. David Bowie has had such a storied and wild career and life. Yeah, that's definitely in a musician I wish I would have been able to see. So this book, it starts with when he's younger and just like he was asked in an interview at one point in time if there was any kind of thread that ran through his music because, you know, his music has been like all over the place from like glam rock to like avant-garde to jazz to experimental and like all over the place. So it's never stayed quite in one vein. And he said one of the things that kind of like was a thread that wove through it was his continuing search throughout his life for like spirituality. And that spirituality came from like a conglomeration of many different things, you know, starting with when he was 10, he was a choir boy in church. And so maybe that was the beginning of spark of like, what does it all mean? Is there really like some freaking creator, big person in the sky up there? Then he got into Buddhism and occultism and witchcraft, messiahs, the Kabbalah, like so much of the stuff that he would delve into and read about and learn. A lot of this would come through in his music. This book, it kind of goes into like the different albums and what kind of influenced those, but also follows like the trajectory of his career and like how he was up and coming, the different bands he was in for like how 9 years he played in different bands, he did different stuff, but nothing was really sticking. It took quite a while for him to, you know, rise to become the icon that we know him as today. The world, I think, is a better place for having his music exist in it. So yeah, this book takes us on quite the journey. And there's things in here like I didn't know before. Like I didn't know that at one point in time that he had lived with Iggy Pop for a while. They made a couple albums together. The one was called like The Idiot. There's some other albums that I hadn't heard of that I want to check out. One that was mentioned was called The Buddha of Suburbia. And apparently it's lesser known, but it's supposed to be like Bowie himself thought that it was one of his best. I'm curious to see if I can track that one down. So yeah, you get into some of the backstory of like him growing up as a kid. Originally, his name was David Jones. At one point in time, he was with this one band and he was going by Davy Jones. And like his manager was like, hey, you know, maybe you should change your name because people might think you're like Davy Jones of the Monkees and we don't want to get you confused with that. And I don't know if he actually changed his name at that point in time, but maybe that kind of stuck in his brain. And at some point he changed it to David Bowie. And the reason it said in the book that the reason he chose Bowie is because a Bowie knife, it cuts both ways. So it was a bit symbolic with that name change. To get into some of that, you get into who his parents were and what they did and the people that he met along the way, like the moments in time in his life, you know, going through like addiction with cocaine and alcohol, and then like a weird spell, like when he was super into occultism and how he was terrified of Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page was super into occult, and like he at one point had bought Aleister Crowley's old house that was in Scotland and was into some weird stuff. And David Bowie was like convinced at one point that he had sent this couple that wanted to take his semen. I don't know, weird crap going on. So some really effed up stuff. And you get into that too. All this stuff is really interesting and fascinating to me. And then you get to when he comes into the 90s and then he gets sober and he stopped doing drugs, he stopped drinking. And this is a point when his career started to rise back up again because it's, you know, you get up to the highs, you go down to the lows. As he said at one point, like he maybe weighed like 80 pounds due to all the drug use and all the cocaine and all that stuff. So you get into some of that. You get into some of his different interests and what he was in and the way he was experimenting with music, the different people he worked with, Brian Eno and some of the other creatives that come into play. And like some of the friends that he had when he met when he was a kid, like remained friends with him throughout his whole life, which I always find that impressive when people still have friends that they knew when they were like 10 years old up until, you know, when they pass away. That's wild because so many people fade into the background of your life. Yeah, and one of the things too, when he stopped doing drugs and drinking, one of the things he said was that for him, you know, it's very hard to have relationships when you're doing drugs and drinking. For me personally, anyway. You become closed off, unreceptive, insensitive. And then he says he was very lucky that he found his way out of that. And yeah, like, it really does tamp down on so many things, whether it's your relationships in life, your motivation, your inspiration, you're just deadening yourself to the things that you could do, the motivation to do it, deadening your spirit to the possibilities of what you can accomplish when you're not inside of a dark cloud. So it gets into that. I liked also seeing, like, you go through pretty much each album and it talks about like what some of the influences were, what Bowie was doing at the time. And the author that wrote this book, Peter Omerad, I think did a really fantastic job of pulling you into the story, giving you like the highlights and glimpses into David Bowie's life and his creativity and what was behind each album and how it was the different types of spirituality and things that he was into in his life kind of came through in the albums. You know what it makes me want to do, and I don't know if I could even get a hold of all of them, would be to like get all of these albums and listen to them sequentially. I think that'd be something cool to do, like listen to every single one of his albums, write down some notes about it. I don't know. Like some of them though are kind of obscure and maybe even out of print. Like I don't know if I'll be able to find that Buddha of Suburbia or whatever that one I said earlier was, but I'm going to look for it because I think that'd be pretty cool. Yeah. So if you like music, if you like David Bowie, if you're interested in music from, you know, like the 60s, 70s, up until like, I mean, he was performing till, oh, when did he pass away? I think it was 2015 or 2016 is when he passed away. He had done a few performances up until that point in time. He had quite the prolific career and influence on so many people. If you like learning about like the different kinds of weird and interesting spirituality that people can possibly be into and how that influences their music and career, then you might be interested in this book. Definitely check it out. And if you enjoyed hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.